Great. We can start. So, thank you for being here. So now the next talk of the day is by Professor Noortje. She is professor in science, technology, and sociology in the Center for Interdisciplinary Methodologies in the University of Warwick. She studied philosophy and sociology of science and technology at the University of Amsterdam and conducted her doctoral research on object-centered approaches to public involvement in technological societies at the École de Mines in Paris. Noortje's work investigates issues at the intersection of innovation, everyday environments, and public life. The role of mundane materials in democratic engagement, technology testing in society, and changing relations between social life and social science in a computational age. She is currently a visiting professor in the Media Cooperation Center at the University of Siegen in Germany, and in the Laboratoire Interdisciplinaire sur les Reflexivités at the EHESS in Paris. So today's presentation is called In and Out of J, Transforming AI and Controversies with People with Provocative Methods. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that context. And also thank you to Sharon and to colleagues here at the Design Institute for hosting us, and you for hosting our session, because I'm really pleased to have an opportunity to discuss. So my background is not in design. I am a sociologist and a bit of an interloper even in sociology, because I did my PhD in philosophy. But have over the years collaborated with designers and design researchers, and I'm now involved in a project called Shaping AI, which is a 3-year research project that's focused on controversies about artificial intelligence, and I'll say a little bit more about that later. But one of the most important aspects of this research for me is that it involves collaboration with design researchers. And so I'm at the moment really sort of working on this question of how can we do this well, sort of cross social research and sociology with design and design research. So what I thought I'd do is that I will present to you this project, which is very much still ongoing. So it's a 3-year project, and we're now a little bit, we're sort of halfway, and then invite you into a kind of a discussion about how we approach this collaboration between social and design research in this project. And I think I would ask you especially maybe to pay attention to this question of dialogue that Sharon raised. Because as Rania also mentioned, we've had some conversations in the run-up to this symposium, and a couple of themes emerged in that discussion to do with dialogue. Sharon also introduced them this morning, and as we're very much concerned with participation in controversies about AI, this question of how do we enable dialogue, how do we relate to the dialogues or failed dialogues that are ongoing in our societies about AI is really a key question for us. Just to make the connection with those themes that Sharon raised, I just want to flag 3 sort of points of attention in relation to the theme of the symposium. So the first is, we talked about crisis and how this notion of crisis may cloak the multiplicity of problematic situation, the multiplicities of trouble, of harm, of suffering that may underlie what we call crisis. Now for me, this very much connects with this theme of controversy, because controversy is historically valued as the moment where disagreement breaks into the open. So if you look at controversies historically, for instance, when the controversy about climate change started in the late 80s and early 90s of the previous century, this was really valued as an important moment where disagreement about climate change made it possible to articulate all kinds of different frames and understandings of what the problem was. So I think one of our questions might be, is controversy enabling that kind of engagement with a crisis where we can do justice to the multiplicity of problematic situations or forms of suffering in relation to, in this case, AI. I've got 2 more points just to sort of make the connection. So the second point is, Sharon mentioned this morning this question, can we move beyond dialogue? Can dialogue sometimes be oppressive in that it is a disarticulation of conflict and tension? Well, here again, I think controversy in public, disagreeing in public, has played an important role, I think, historically and also culturally, as the place where we were forced to move beyond dialogue. So controversy, in a kind of a technical term, controversy is to disagree under conditions of incommensurability. So a controversy arises when we do not agree on the terms of the debate, when we cannot have an agreement on what is the frame in which we define what the problem is. So again, I think that, it's here there is a connection. And just on incommensurability, because I do care about it very much, there is an anthropologist called Elizabeth Povinelli, who's based in New York, and she wrote an article called Radical Worlds. And the subtitle is something like Incommensurability and Inconceivability. And she makes this argument that liberalism requires the presence of the other to validate its project of freedom and accountability. But in doing that, liberalism negates the radical difference between, in this case, I guess you would say self and other. So Povinelli makes this argument that incommensurability, recognizing that we all live in worlds that don't translate into one another, that this is a kind of a defining question and problem. Also to connect with that, the Stuart Hall citation that made that point, but on a wider frame. Just last connection. Again, Sharon asked about new forms of dialogue, and I do think I should just put the cards on the table to say that I do have a kind of a hope that working across social research and design research can be a way of breaking the existing forms of dialogue, partly to do with design as a materially aware practice, which is so often lacking when public dialogue is designed by social scientists. I do have that commitment. That commitment works through the project, as I'll show you. And so it would be interesting also for me to hear in our conversation, am I projecting stuff onto design and design research, which might actually be inappropriate or uncomfortable or just so that's basically one of the questions I bring here now. Okay, so now without too much further ado, I will go and just present you the work as we've been developing it. So our project starts with current contemporary controversies about artificial intelligence. Now, there are lots of those around these days. Here you see two examples. A controversy about Google Glass, which was a controversy about what Google itself declared a moonshot technology in which they built facial recognition into everyday glasses. A second controversy in recent years focused on Clearview AI, a company that developed a real-time facial recognition service where they had built up a very large database of profiles which would enable in this service the identification in real time of suspect individuals. Now, both these projects sparked controversy, no doubt about it. Lots of debate in the news media, lots of debate among organizations engaged with the societal impact of AI that noted all kinds of problematics around privacy, surveillance, racism, like anti-accountability, privatization of policing. There was a whole array of problems and issues that were named in news media as directly associated with these technologies. Now, one of the very difficult things, though, and challenging things from the perspective of someone who needs to study these controversies, or is involved in a project to study these controversies, is that they seem, in the way they are presented and deployed, there seems to be something strategic about controversies about AI. So here you see, for instance, in Wired, where it is stated Google Glass wasn't a failure, it raised crucial concern. I mean, they don't quite say in the interview with these Google employees that it was a technology of controversy. No, they don't quite say Google Glass was launched in order to cause controversy, so that we could make society ready for this disruption of these new possibilities of facial recognition. But there is an element of that. Now, and with Clearview AI too, there was widespread controversy, rightly so. In the UK, the Information Commissioner's Office recommended that this service be banned, and indeed it is now the case that the police is no longer allowed to solicit Clearview services in the UK. But again, when you look at the widespread reporting of these spectacular capacities for Clearview to identify in real time whether a suspect is somehow present anywhere one wants to raise this question, again gives a kind of a suspicion that there was a kind of a hyping of these disruptive capacities which served Clearview's market valuation quite well. So there's something around, yes, these technologies are deeply controversial. We need to engage critically with these controversial aspects, but we also need to be really attentive to how controversy can be used and abused by the companies involved. So that was sort of the starting point for this project, Shaping 21st Century AI, mapping AI controversies across spheres. Now, in some ways, this is a really, I would say, standard social science research project, in that we have 4 countries, Canada, Germany, UK, and France. And in each of the countries, a national team of researchers investigates AI controversies in a particular domain. So our colleagues in Canada are mapping AI controversies in the media in a 10-year period, from 2012 to 2022. Colleagues in Germany are analyzing controversies in public policy. We're analyzing AI controversies in research. And then comes the very welcome sort of glitch in this neat list that I'm giving you, which is that our colleagues in France, based in Sciences Po, their task is to research participation in AI controversy. And it also happens to be that this is where our design researchers are based. And somehow this element of also having participation as part of the research really is allowing us to approach this project in an unusual, strange, experimental way. So what we're saying is, we are not only observing controversies. Our job as researchers is not just to observe and to describe. No, in our project we're also engaged with how participation in AI controversies is structured and enabled. And we will use this to not just go along with the sort of strategic uses and abuses of controversy. So I'll say a little bit more about how that works. First though, I'm going to unpack a little bit further why just observing controversies as a social scientist doesn't work. Yeah, so the work with design researchers to actively facilitate participation in AI controversy is what has become the driving force of this project. And it is precisely because just observing controversies as they unfold would make us, we feel, too complicit in just dominant framings of what is controversial about AI. So what is the problem here? I will just sort of unpack the point where I started. So a few years back, a very large language model called GPT-2 was launched by a company called OpenAI. Now, when this technology was launched, and it's a form of predictive analytics that will predict language use and can be used in virtual assistants and chatbots and all kinds of applications. When this product was launched, service, the company behind it, OpenAI, declared that its own technology was dangerous, that it was too dangerous to be released to the public. So they noted this large model was kept under lock and key for very long as it was deemed too dangerous. And this was a controversial decision that led to a backlash from the open source community. So you see OpenAI sort of being invested in its own technology being disruptive in society. And indeed, what you saw, that this claim that this model was so powerful that it was dangerous to society, got picked up by the media very widely and really built a community of attention for this model. And indeed, it really contributed to its valuation. So we here have to sort of look at how the impact of technology on society can be invoked as a strategy of creating value for technologies for innovation. Now, this takes many strange and different forms. So one other example that I wanted to mention to you is a workshop that took place at Stanford University in their Center for Human-Centered Computing. And computer scientists had organized this symposium, which was very high profile scientific participation, as enabling specifically also dialogue between computer science and ethics about the controversial impact of AI. Now, what you see here in the introduction is a computer scientist who says, they're just facts about our new large language models, our predictive AI, that you can't ignore. What we're seeing is a paradigm shift. GTP3, GTP2, I think all of these technologies are going to have profound implications. How AI will develop, who will have access, and there will also be heavy social consequences that will result from each technological decision. So this is the statement which a computer scientist opens this conference on, very much, I would say, sort of claiming kind of a reality for technology by invoking its social impact. So there's going to be heavy social consequences with each technological decision. like this technology is real. It isn't still in its development phase, etc. What subsequently happened is that Margaret Mitchell was the first speaker in the session on AI and ethics, which happened that afternoon. And she is an independent AI ethics expert who used to work at Google and no longer does. And she basically spent her presentation explaining why all her colleagues had decided to boycott this conference. And she made sort of a version of the argument that I made now, that computer science needs ethicists to declare how dangerous and impactful their technologies are, but there is very little interest from the computer science community to actually understand what is AI, how is it understood from a perspective of communities in society. Is it relevant? Is artificial intelligence really the kind of technology that we want to spend our time attending to if the question is the impact of technology on society? So there was, again, a real critical sort of drive that I think is important there. So there's controversy about controversy. Claims to disruption may obscure rather than clarify. Last challenge for us is there's an abundance of controversies, there's an abundance of friction, there's an abundance of incidents and accidents involving AI. So I'm not sure you can see this list, but this is the AI incident database, which catalogs basically frictionless situations, accidents, incidents where AI caused harm and suffering in society or caused disruption. Now, this AI incident base is now, I mean, here you see search 333 records, but I mean, it's running into the 2000s and the 3000s of records. So we're also dealing with a kind of an abundance of incidents and accidents involving AI, which makes it really sort of impossible to say, oh, this is the controversy about AI that matters. Right? There's a kind of a multiplicity to how AI exists in society that we really need to attend to. So how to study and understand AI controversy under these conditions? So this is where my collaboration with design research comes in. Here is a quote from Donato Ricci, who is a design researcher at the Media Lab in Sciences Po, my colleague, and he proposed that in our project we simply stop trying to observe controversies in society as we as social scientists have been taught to do. We observe what happens in the world. He said instead we should not be trying to find the right data that can somehow allow us to see what is really controversial about AI in the world. What we should do instead is we should open our lab up. We should instead strive to create conditions under which we can use data to make actors speak. So rather than us patiently observing and recording which controversies are unfolding in society, we should actively create conditions where we can use data to make actors speak. It's a kind of a regrounding of the closed analysis that we perform inside the labs, and instead perform analysis in open situations. So this really became a kind of our call in this project. And we adopted the following research design, which goes in 3 steps. First, we said we need to really actively configure the context from which we analyze AI controversies. And we spoke about this in terms of inviting an extended peer community into our project. So rather than us just documenting what's controversial about AI, we invite particular experts and activists and journalists who work in this area and ask them what for you is most controversial about AI. Second step, we very deliberately are selective in which AI controversies we analyze. So we select particular controversies for their capacity to problematize AI across the science and non-science boundary. So we're not going to indiscriminately just map all the AI controversies as they're popping up all over the place, and we're going to select the particular ones for study that have the capacity to problematize AI. Third, rather than just documenting controversies, we see it as our task to invite the elaboration of AI controversies. So we will invite our peer community of experts, activists, journalists and others into the project in order to, together with them, conduct a kind of a diagnosis, like what are the shapes of our AI controversies today? How are they out of shape? How would we reshape the dialogue or the controversy about AI so that it can elicit the right problem articulations? So it's a kind of deliberate, purposeful investment in a kind of a reshaping of the controversies once we've sort of identified them or selected them from the abundance of AI controversies. And just to be clear, so I will refer to our participants as experts because we are analyzing AI research controversies, but we define as an expert anyone who, and here is a definition from Frenkovic and Ravic, those with a stake in the issues and who are committed to genuine debate. And so that notion of having a stake in the issue and being committed to genuine debate, that's a criterion of expertise as we rely on it. So that can also derive from experience, it can derive from professional practice. It's not only sort of certified scientific experts who fit that. So I'll just now go how we are working on these 3 steps. So first step is configure the context. We did this through an expert consultation. So this was we did this last year, so we were sort of still coming out of COVID and we decided to do this online. And we asked in this online expert consultation, we asked a very basic question, what are the most important AI controversies of the last 10 years and which are the most important to you? And this may also be that the most important controversy is one that's actually currently overlooked in the media. So the most important doesn't mean the most well-known. And we asked this question we sent this invitation to 250 experts, which we had assembled through what we call a kind of a standpoint methodology. So we didn't take a kind of abstract point of view where we said, oh, these are all the experts in the UK. No, we focused on specific events, and here you see the list of events where we felt those with a stake in the issue and committed to genuine debate in the area of AI and society could be found in that period. So we really, we are adopting the standpoint of these particular events in configuring and assembling and inviting this expert community into our project. So it's a situated methodology. Now we then received responses to our consultation, and working with our responses to our consultation, we were faced once again with abundance. So we received innumerable problematizations, accidents, incidents, areas of controversy identified by our participants. So I'll just give you a readout just so that you get a sense of the flavor of what kind of things were mentioned. The exams fiasco, facial feature discovery for ethnicity recognition, eye border control, Nikon cameras, 9 schools in Asia, Scotland use FR to pay for lunch, Uyghurs in Xinjiang, the documentary about Joy's work, Clearview AI, which we saw, Slaughterbots, storming of Congress, Amazon hiring tool, Google Nightingale, Home Office passport checks, Timnit Gebru resignation. So we had a kind of an abundance of of frictions, of problematizations. But at least we now had a community from which they emerged, rather than just from some abstract media space. In developing our kind of analysis of these, started to call them problematization. Our guiding thought became that controversy is about much more than disagreement. So also in that literature that I mentioned, which values controversy because it's a moment where divergent frames get explicated and we know that we cannot agree to agree. Still, that literature assumed that controversy is about disagreement. So it was a kind of a discursive understanding of controversy. And I think based on these responses from our consultation, we're really at the point where what matters in controversy, why is controversy important? It's because it brings into view specific failures, incidents, and troubling events in which AI is articulated as a source of suffering, injustice, or harm. So we're really foregrounding friction as a dimension of controversy. And so this is also how we sort of started to work with those responses, that we identified topics. So some of the controversies that were mentioned were about facial recognitions, others were about machine bias, but we recognized our respondents also offered us problematizations. So they said bad science, politically naive, the shortfall of literacy among scholars, politicians, and lay people, Amazon's secret tool, Facebook was pushing to one side of the Brexit debate, the attempt to rectify issues such as bias without changing underlying social, political, economic orders and disorders. So we sort of took from this exercise that controversy really is about problematization and the surfacing of friction, rather than being only about disagreement. So that was our first step, configure the context. Next step, qualifying AI controversies. And I'll do this relatively quickly. If there are particular figures where you would like me to say more, maybe we can do that later. So we then said, okay, we've now received these problematizations and these frictions. How are we now going to proceed analytically? So here we took that really selective approach that I mentioned in the beginning. We said we should identify now particular frictions that have the capacity to problematize AI in a way that doesn't just reconfirm sort of the boundaries between, okay, this is what the scientists say the problem is, this is what the social scientists say the problem is, this is what the environmental activists say the problem is. So to really try and use the analysis of friction to get to, so what problematizations are being generated through controversy. Now, so we work with different ways in categorizing and recategorizing our objects, and in the end we looked at those that sort of were across different topic areas, and also ones that had references to scientific articles, because they made sort of more specific what is the research controversy in each case. And so we identified 5 areas of controversy for further analysis. That's what we're working on now. So the large language models, the science of facial recognition, algorithmic decision making, NHS and DeepMind, and deep learning as a solution to AI. And so in first instance now, in this analysis phase, we're analyzing conversations on Twitter in relation to these topics. So we're working with the Twitter Academic API, which means that we can get longitudinal data from Twitter. So we get the Twitter data from the moment that the keyword first appeared. So in the first case, we focused our analysis on stochastic parrots, which was a paper criticizing large language models by Timnit Gebru and Emily Bender. And so we have quite targeted data collection, and in this case, we actually have only 3,000 conversations on Twitter that are actually about the paper, which is really nice because it means we can also work with sort of smaller data sets than usually in Twitter analysis. We have this broad net approach. And so we're really analyzing conversations. So our unit of analysis is the conversation, and we look at, whether disagreement is performed in our conversation. So do they actually generate specific points of contention? But we also look at the shape of the conversations. Are there a lot of branches? How deep does the conversation go? Now, this is an ongoing analysis. We're going in different directions with it. I'll just show you a little bit of the things that our analysis is throwing up. But what is guiding us in the work is that in January, February, we will be engaging anew with our extended peer community. And our aim is to bring to that extended peer community some of our analysis of the controversies that they suggested that we investigate. So this is topic identification in the controversy about stochastic parrots. So this is the controversy about the paper by Timnit Gebru that got published, the controversial Google ethics paper, which identified large sets of problems with the large language models under development at Google. So problems of scientific quality, problems of a corporate research culture, where science and the development of linguistics in effect was just constrained and dominated by corporate research culture, issues around social justice, gender biases, scientific quality. These were the kind of in culture war, male white privilege in AI. So starting to surface problematizations of AI that I hope is also clear are different from the usual list of privacy surveillance that we normally get when the question is, oh, why is AI controversial? Why is it a problem for society? And then we also look at, what's the level of disagreement on Twitter around these specific topics. So what we found quite interesting is to see that, like, corporate research culture in this controversy about large language models is like it's both a very often discussed but also very contentious issue, where other questions like the tech industry, the role of government in the tech industry, and responsible research and innovation is much less contentious. So what we're looking at, can we look at disagreement within Twitter conversations as something that can point us to topics that are relevant for further exploration. Also, as part of this analysis, we loop back to our respondents. So we are currently conducting pretty short online interviews with between 30 and 40 of the participants that responded to the initial consultation. And so we present to them kind of boiled down, cooked down versions of their findings, asking them to give us basically their view on, are the topics that came out of our consultation as the most controversial, are they also the most controversial for you? What's missing? And so we have a whole sort of series of these kind of figures where we invite them to comment using Figma. And they're talking a lot. We were worrying that they were not going to talk very much, but they're talking a lot. And we're recording so that we also then have the transcripts of the conversation. Okay, so last part. How do we move from this kind of generating of the problematization, qualifying of the frictions and the controversies and the problems, to then creating conditions where we can really start to both sort of diagnose, so what's going on with our AI controversies today in these countries, but also start creating, we call it a kind of a reshaping of AI controversies to really try and figure out, to have sort of genuine debate among those with a stake in the issue. What kind of controversies do we need? So how do we get from the controversies that we have to the controversies that we need? And I've always looked at design research and work of many colleagues who work on this shift. And sometimes they use words like speculation, and it's taken me years to come to terms with this.
And a couple of books.
Yes, exactly. And I think I'm finally there. That this move from the controversies to we have to the ones we need is really what we should be working on. So I told you we're working with design researchers in Paris, and together we've been developing this methodology which begins by materializing the controversies. So our colleagues in Paris do this by creating printouts of key sort of documents and contributions to AI controversies in France. So they're working in the French context. So they invite their participants to select particular documents that are salient to them, and their participants, like ours, are extended peer community members, so they define themselves as having a stake in AI debates. And then they invite them to narrate the controversy. So of course they will pick documents that matter to them. You know, for instance, if they are a lawyer and they're working on proper intellectual property rights, they'll pick different documents than when they are a neighborhood community activist working on policing and AI, right? So, but they use the kind of the narration, so inviting participants to narrate the controversy, to do this work of diagnostics of like what really matters and what kind of controversy do we need. So we're trying to sort of formalize our method as we're doing it. We have different ways, but one of the ways that we're thinking about it is that we're doing this kind of a controversy analysis that doesn't just describe the controversy, but elaborates it, shapes it, that it involves 3 steps. First, a kind of a composition. So what are the elements that you need to invoke to problematize AI in a way that is productive or generative for that person? So composition, the picking of the documents. Second, there's a step in between here that I didn't put on the slide, is where the design researchers themselves make a composition of the compositions. So they've conducted, I think, well, also between 20 or 30 interviews. And so they identify what kind of compositions have our participants put forward, how do we group them. Then you select those you want to take further. And then comes in a way, the most important part, which is the recomposition of the controversy. So in this workshop in La Villette in Paris in June, so the participants that had done the work of composition, so who were, I guess you could still say interviewed, they were brought together and they were asked to recompose the controversy. So to say, to answer this question as I already posed it, what controversy do we need? You know, what are the key sort of interventions, articulations, moments that we really need to pay attention to if we want our debates to be generative or productive? So we are now, and I've got 2-3 more slides. So, we're now in the middle of figuring out how we would like to design our e-laboratory. So how would we like to enable this kind of recomposing of the controversies based on the materials that we have assembled as part of our research? So what we're working on at the moment is we're thinking about a slider, which you can also think of as a diagnostic grid. So we have 5 sort of questions that we feel it's important to ask about our AI controversies. First, who is affected by AI? Who is foregrounded as affected by AI in this controversy? Where does the controversy happen? How situated is it? Now, is the controversy happening only sort of on Twitter with reference to Google? Or is there also a kind of a, how situated is it? Is there references to other places, locations, situations? So abstract located. Okay, we were in France, so the question was who is responsable for the problem? So does the controversy identify a kind of a problem owner? Like who is the addressee? How addressable are the issues identified in the controversy? Does it require radical change? Or can it be addressed through incremental change, piecemeal intervention? And participation, who is involved? And so what we're thinking about doing is create an event where we can invite our participants in to create controversy objects. Because once you have this kind of a diagnostic grid, you can work together to create the shape for the controversy that you're working on as a group. And see how badly out of shape it is. You know, if it's completely like wide in who's affected, abstract, top-down, piecemeal, and few, you know, you'll have a really badly shaped controversy. Well, if you have a controversy that, you know, is maybe located, bottom-up, also invokes possibility of more radical change, you might, as a group, say, now we have a controversy shape that we like a bit better. Though it's quite important, of course, that we don't necessarily specify what is the right shape. But because, like, what I like about these figures is that some are actually pretty plonky shapes. Like, I mean, they're still quite. These are all still a little bit too beautiful for my inexpert perspective. But, yeah, so this is where we're at. How can we, and how can we create this kind of a slider where we bring our participants together, we ask them to work on one controversy, and to work to discover what is the shape of our controversy. And like France, we want to provide our participants with a kind of a set of materials that they can rely on as a kind of a common orientation. So what is the controversy about large language models? You know, we would give them the stochastic parrot paper, we would give them the press release that I showed you earlier, we would maybe give them some overview of what is the controversy on Twitter, just so that they have some materials that they can work with. So this is where we're at. I leave you in the middle of where we're at. And just the 2 main points to close with. So why is this collaboration between social and design research so important for our project? Because we really need to move beyond observing AI controversies. So that's speaking as social scientists who have always been trained to observe and not, at least in my neck of the woods, to not intervene. In psychology, this is different. Experimental approaches are more prominent. So a critical methodology of eliciting controversy, this in the face of the strategic deployment of controversy about AI. We want to actively work with experts to dramatize what is important and possibly overlooked. Then just the last point to leave you with is that we're becoming more and more aware how interconnected all of our AI controversies are. So, and there's potentially a bit of a tension because when saying, we want to create these kind of controversy objects, it might sound like we have a kind of a single issue kind of perspective on AI controversy. But as I showed you in that topic analysis, you know, there's such a broad range of issues around corporate power, around bias, around gender, around the environment that come together in AI controversy. So we feel like we're dealing also sometimes with super controversies. They highlight the interconnectedness of issues, which I think is really important, but also how are we going to somehow get that into our work, that kind of awareness of that interconnectedness. So that's it.
Thank you for super interesting talk. We have 20 minutes for questions from you. So if you have any question, Ramya, and then input at those preference. So,
thank you, that was fascinating. I have at least 2.5 questions. I will start with one.
Great.
In relation to the first part of your talk, where you were evoking the way that, and I even wrote down here that these companies or these people seem to have a kind of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, where they kind of harm themselves in a way to for particular purposes, which I think is fascinating, the way that also the market economy works around that. And I wonder if that's specific to this area. It's not. I think it's also in the area of oil and energy. There are companies fostering denial and climate skepticism from the oil interest perspective. So I think the purposes of, I've written down here, what is the purpose? What are the purposes of, and the politics, which is even more interesting to me, of the controversialization? Mm-hmm. Because I could say the same thing from the perspective, so that's one thing. And I think I'm actually speculating on 3 different types of logics from design side, which is how you can handle the politics of controversialization. Yeah. And I haven't worked this through yet, but if you work from a rationalist perspective, if you work from a rhetorical perspective, or if you work from a pragmatist perspective, I think those generate very different things. Yeah. Okay, that's a very abstract comment because I'm working through that, but I could ask that same question, what is the purpose of controversialization? I could ask the same question to a future studies person or a design futures person like me. What is the purpose, the political purpose, or the market purpose, which is also politics, of that particular problematization or representation or materialization? And this is actually what I want to do to get more criticality into those kind of studies. Do we want to rationally arrive at that vision? Do we want to rhetorically use that vision to shake, to stun, the shock and awe approach of some of these? Or do we want to use these in more pragmatic ways to develop deliberation, constructive engagement? And that also has to do with where these then materializations are in the process or in the project. Is it at the start in order to generate something further? Is it partway through because it's grasped something and it's trying to articulate something which then becomes part of a longer process? Or is it something to, so those are actually possible processes that could, or directions of action that could come out of these 3 different logics, which I haven't entirely worked through yet. But so that's actually a comment, and it's not a question. But I do have another question, which is, could AI, because I'm interested in this method, because I can actually see that this method of looking at how design for debate actually results from, is part of processing and generating debate. So design for debate is the slogan of the motto of critical design. And a lot of people have been working on, well, what happens? Where is the debate? How do you know there's debate? You've done the design part, but what about the debate part? And various doctoral students in design, critical design, discursive design have been working with, well, what about the debate part? What kind of deliberation? And I think there's really interesting things from your methodology which do things both for critical design and for design futures, which is always outside of our project scope, which is analyzing what follows, or analyzing what's happened before that generates the content of those images. And I wonder if this is now a question about how generic this method is, or how tied it is to the particular type of content, the particular realm of controversy. Could I replace ecology or climate emergency with AI and use these same methods, tools, even visualization techniques.
Great, thank you. So I really like how you put this, like the politics of controversialization and how to handle it. And one of the things I realized in preparing to speak here and be here with you is that I realized how much my sort of negotiation or struggling with this is informed by what's expected from social science. So in some ways I came with some baggage, which is the baggage, the social scientist is expected to observe the controversy, to describe how the controversy unfolds, and so that I look to methods of provocation that can in a way shake up that reflex in social science to just observe, because when what unfolds is so problematic to just observe, it's just not good enough, and I think that's why I also really wanted to sort of say to you that there is a kind of a sensibility or an awareness that I often find or recognize when I speak with people with design backgrounds that I think is really important to just wider debates about methodology across fields. So it's a kind of a kudos to you. go design researchers. Just very quickly, so this notion of the diagnostic grid, so I mean, I've been working on it also with other other areas, but it would probably need to be adapted, and this is indeed one of the questions. Like, we're trying this out now, and then let's see.
Okay.
It would be great.
Because I could almost put this process model on top of a project I've done in the area of energy, using critical design multiple scenarios intended to problematize the different political agendas, an eco-modernist agenda versus a degrowth agenda versus a civil disobedience agenda. And I could almost imagine a similar,
Great. Yeah.
I would like somehow to add to Ramer's question, or to bring it to the discussion, because it seems to me that this kind of engagement with an issues beyond observation, it's coming back to what Bruno Latour was mentioning, making this difference between matter of fact and matter of concerns. I guess what does concerns me and what it's actually as a fact. And I really appreciated also the way you introduce this kind of difference between controversies we have and controversies we need. And I think it's quite an interesting issue, because even from a design perspective, and now I would like to make reference to my PhD coordinator in France, because I used to do my PhD in Paris. It's what exactly is a need? It's a lack of something. So the question is, what kind of controversies or topics do actually we not bring to the table, or we avoid somehow, it seems to me. And from this perspective, it might be interesting. Your project seems quite interesting, because it's trying to make sense of this kind of big meta conversations that are taking place now on Twitter, or kind of this difference between opinion and actually a proper discussion. What's the difference between having an opinion into a certain topic and really having a discussion about what is involved? So I think I really liked your this idea of controversies we have and the controversies we need, and where the science work or scientist work should come into question somehow. Thank you.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've previously done work around issue publics, and I should just give full disclosure in the interest of time that my PhD supervisor was Bruno Latour, so there might have been some something. I worked on that in that time. But I think what is really important to me is that so the work I did is how issues jointly implicate actors who do not share an interest, a stake, or even a language. And so this has always been my quibble with the notion of the matter of concern, because it assumes that concern is articulated, but often the articulation of concern is the very sort of barrier because of that absence of vocabulary. So, I mean, in that sense, I'm really interested in that you point at needs, the controversies we need, in terms of this lack, in terms of a kind of a blind spot.
Probably this is a French-like conversation, because I know Pierre Damien Ric had a lot of debates with Bruno Latour, precisely on this idea what exactly means to be modern and what exactly is modernity. Have you ever stopped to be modern, or have we already been modern at some point? So I know that there was a lot of debate in this kind of aspects.
Yeah. And for me, it's really, just to make the last point, for me, it's really tied very closely to institutions. So issue publics, they don't have a platform, they don't have a forum, they don't have, the parliament, where they can take their rightful seat to articulate their faction's concern. So I think there's something around the kind of the lack of institutionalization that is really important if we want to understand, societal needs or community needs, because I think a lot of what we've discussed today about, processes where sort of institutional definitions override what emerges from situations or communities has a lot to do with those dynamics of institutional overdetermination of definitions. So that's, I think, all this process of why do we need all this machinery to articulate what's the problem with AI. It's because of that. It's because if we don't do all this work, we end up just regurgitating definitions that aren't actually serve our interests.
So there are simply definitions which are not at work, and I'm translating from French, sorry, I'm thinking in French right now. So we don't put this kind of definition really at work. We don't work with them. So they're not present in the public life. They're just superficial concepts, which are borrowed to cover actually more than to reveal.
Thank you very much for your talk and for sharing with us this really impressive piece of research and analysis. I have a couple of thoughts that emerged listening to you. The first one, actually circling back to what you mentioned at the beginning about how those controversy that end in the public media becomes perhaps strategic. And I wonder if in the project you have investigated a little bit more the manufacturing of indignation, also the manufacturing of strategic ignorance through various use of media and platforms. That is one question. And the other one has to do with the design outcomes that you've shown. And I wonder if with your team or designers you have considered other outputs rather than objects. What kind of design constraints have you considered in order to create those objects, and why objects rather than, I don't know, a piece of world building, a piece of storytelling, or a more developed scenario that also has to do with taking those controversies that perhaps are needed or wanted or chosen into a futurescape. So why object and not world building? Thank you.
good challenging questions. And
design.
yes. So maybe I should say two ways in which we're stuck. Just because it might. So on the sort of the manufacture of indignation and sort of artificial controversies, like there are a number of sort of places where it's really hard to decide where to go. So the first is, I don't want to be seen to trivialize how AI is impacting society. Right? So there's a risk if I place too much emphasis on, oh, look how artificially created these controversies are, that it sounds like we're sort of delegitimizing all those actors and initiatives that are about feeding the controversy. So the other issue is that part of me wants to do like has kind of a bourgeois reflex, which is we need spaces for genuine debate. We need to restore the places of genuine debate in the face of, cultures of outrage, where social media equates controversy with outrage, which I found personally outrageous, because a genuine debate is completely different from a scandal. But I don't want to go there, because then I'm just doing a kind of we all need to learn how to be proper debating citizens, and I don't want to. I just don't think that that's helpful. And so bringing in the friction and saying controversy is about more than disagreement, it's also about friction. I think that's the way that we're trying to grapple with that. So because we're on the one hand saying, look, these are really serious frictions. They are occurring. They are experienced in myriads of ways. It's just the labeling of the issues in the media that is being so restrictive and like we heard, it doesn't get us from A to B to keep saying privacy concern, privacy concern, privacy concern. So that's, I think, where this focus on friction. That said, having the courage to really do that analysis of showing, like, manufacture of controversy, I think it's really important work. But I'd probably say do it in a different area. Let's not do it with AI.
And about objects?
About objects. So it's a case of, again, the social science or social research design, because I really like talking about objects and things to social scientists, because they think they don't matter very often. So in social science, the important categories are class, gender, education, and often we speak as social scientists, I mean, you mentioned this morning, in kind of abstracting manners. So I'm really into like mundane things, everyday objects, to kind of disrupt that kind of hierarchizing of the world between, the stuff that really matters and then the world of mere objects and things. But I realized that more and more actually, that object is also quite reductive. And an object can also abstract in ways that don't help. So maybe we need to do this, we need to reconsider this.
Definitely, because those are representation of a controversy, but they also embody a set of values and constraints that from a designer perspective are really clearly marked, they're really, really evident, and perhaps there is a set of tacit assumptions in how they're presented that need to be considered.
Good. So we go back to our blob.
Yeah, and I think the narrative idea is you can unfold the temporality of something, whereas objects, unless you're talking about going up to it and moving it, they don't really have a temporality to them that I feel that could unpack some of the stories.
But objects can also still be there because you can do world building and create an experience in which people are engaging with boundary objects but within a world rather than in like a gallery exhibition setting. So you know,
situation.
like, yeah, exactly.
Not on a plinth.
Not on a plinth. I'm taking notes. You need to be instructed.
May I add a brief comment?
Not so spectacularized. Yeah, sure.
I mean, we've done a project, as I mentioned earlier, called counter framing design, which is, the parallels are with what you've been doing are, there's a lot. But our controversies start at a different point. We start very much from like community work and observations of practices and drawing on this idea of non-conforming practices as a site through which controversy can be elicited or be seen. And I mean, we've done like mapping work around counter frames and used those as probes with groups of people to try to solicit this kind of debate. But one of the things I wondered about, I think we're running out of time, is that in our work, we've really seen this kind of frame or controversy as the collapse of many of the kind of binary systems of thought that we were trying to move away from. And I'm just wondering how this kind of builds that back in.
Binaries. Yes.
Time for one more question.
Just very quick reply. Spectrum. That's why I am sort of with the slider still, because it is about continua, spectrum. Because I mean, classically, what do you want from a controversy? You want it to show you how the dividing lines are drawn a bit differently from how you thought. Like that's like a controversy as an inquiry is that it articulates social divides that aren't the ones necessarily that we already thought. Sometimes we get the divides we thought constrained us. But so that's why I'm not gonna be anti-binary. For now.
Ask two questions quickly and then one answer.
Okay, good. Yeah.
I'll just do that. You said in the presentation about sort of kind of like the enabling nature of controversy and sort of drawing on the GMO in like France and how that kind of like publicised the issue and created like common knowledge around like scientific and traditionally like expert-led approaches and that. And then from there, there's the potential to address more like structural issues that like are around these kind of like topics. And then just in terms of like the research design for that, it's like very much expert-led in that you like ask the experts to come in and who are like writing. And I think AI in general, like you kind of have to be pretty knowledgeable to be involved within that scene. But then the people who sort of and the examples you gave, who are sort of like feeling the negative effects of AI, are very much like the non-experts. So like my question was kind of how will like from this like the AI controversies and like knowledge around AI become more common knowledge, and how are like the more marginalised experiences and opinions around like AI potentially going to be like designed into the controversies like being part of the research, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess my question is quite relevant because I was intrigued by your comments about Stanford events, which ethicists boycott the event because they didn't properly engage them. So I'm also involved in leading on AI projects with computer scientists and ethicists. And computer scientists think that they know ethics, and they develop programs for teaching ethics, AI ethics, and then there's a bit of a tension between those ethicists and computer science. Whether you capture that kind of controversy in your research, was that kind of meta or super kind of controversies in your, it's just curiosity.
Yeah. I mean, they're both really good questions and they require a longer answer probably than I can give. But I just wanted to talk again about selection. So this consultation that we created, we're running that in all the 4 countries. And our task, I think, is to identify controversies for further analysis that can do some of that work of addressing the sort of exclusionary framing of AI often, but also like what are the communities that are being brought into relation by AI controversy. So because of that, we focused on facial recognition because it is really a case where on the one hand you have scientific research that uses facial recognition methods, but also you have a clear domain of application in policing in particular, but also in other applications in public spaces like in schools. NHS and DeepMind, it's a controversy that's really focused on where the sort of big tech meets National Health Service. And there it's also very much the medical expert community and the patient community that gets sort of articulated as a relevant group of stakeholders throughout the controversy. And so I think that's what we're focusing on in this work, is that who are the communities brought into relation by the controversy, and how in our analysis can we sort of foreground communities that don't just are just the scientists. So that's why we have this extended peer community, so we also invite journalists and activists into our expert community, and to work on controversies that also can do some of that work of bringing actors into relation that aren't just only scientists or only, but I fully recognize that this project itself has its biases towards expertise, and we need to own up to that. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I know there are more questions, but we don't have more time, so thank you again.